He didn't need to speak. The silence, the burlap sack, and the glint of moonlight on metal did all the talking. The Town That Dreaded Sundown opens not with horror, but with certainty delivered in the form of a narrator's voice that treats every frame like a courtroom record. But under that calm exterior lies a film tangled in blurred truths and real trauma. This isn't just inspired by actual events, it's stitched together from them, line by line, wound by wound. Released in 1976, the film plays like a slow-burn nightmare, grainy, clinical, and almost too specific. It tells the story of a town haunted by a masked assailant, a figure modeled so closely after a real criminal that some survivors believe the filmmakers had access to confidential police files. Victims' names were changed, but barely. Scenes were reconstructed with chilling detail, right down to the placement of bodies. Set in Texarkana, the real site of the 1946 Moonlight Murders. The movie didn't just use the town as a backdrop, it revived its ghosts. Locals recognized not just the settings, but the emotions. The same roads, the same panic, the same unanswered questions. Director Charles B. Pierce called it a public service. But to some residents, it felt like a violation disguised as cinema. Rumors swirled that Pierce had spoken to someone who knew more than they ever told the police. This wasn't a dramatization. It was a resurrection one Texarkana never asked for. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about the Town That Dreaded Sundown, 1976. Fact has shown that voice wasn't acting, it was authority. Before we see a face or hear a scream, the film greets us with a narrator calm, deliberate, and unnervingly formal, Texarkana, a peaceful town gripped by fear. The tone feels like a government briefing rather than a horror movie, and that was the point. The voice belongs to Vern Stearman, a real-life documentary narrator who'd worked with Charles B. Pierce on The Legend of Boggy Creek. He wasn't just cast for his cadence, he was chosen because he made even fiction sound like public record. Pierce instructed him to read the lines like they came from a police deposition. The result is a narrator who doesn't warn us, weighs us down. His delivery, cold and objective, makes the violence that follows feel like it's being archived, not dramatized. But here's what no one told Stearman. The script he was reading wasn't completely made up. Much of it was based on real case files from 1946. Stearman later admitted he was kept in the dark about the true extent of the real-life events. Ironically, the only person in the movie who sounded like he knew everything was never told anything at all. Fact #2. The first scene was a real memory for someone still alive. The movie's first act of violence, an ambush on a young couple parked in a car, wasn't a creative opening. It was a carefully reconstructed version of a real attack that occurred in Texarkana in 1946. The victim was Mary Jean Larry, a teenager who survived a brutal encounter with the so-called Phantom Killer. Her boyfriend was beaten unconscious. She was dragged into the woods, assaulted, and left to die. She didn't. In the film, the events are altered slightly, but the key details remain chillingly intact. The flashlight beam in the eyes, the honking horn, the panic in the trees. What's worse, Mary Jean was alive when the movie was made. She was never consulted, and she never gave consent. When the film premiered, people familiar with the case recognized the scene immediately. So did Mary Jean. According to archived interviews, she was devastated by how closely her trauma had been repurposed for entertainment. In its effort to document history, the movie ended up doing something far colder. It relived someone else's nightmare without asking. Fact #3, the mask wasn't a costume, it was evidence. The figure that stalks the screen in The Town That Dreaded Sundown wears a simple disguise, a white sack with 2 eye holes. It's crude, expressionless, and unforgettable. But what viewers didn't realize is that this wasn't a stylistic choice, it was directly pulled from eyewitness report. During the original 1946 attacks, multiple survivors described the Phantom Killer as wearing a cloth sack over his head, with slits cut out for eyes. The design was never released to the public in full detail, so when locals saw it recreated on screen with eerie precision, many were disturbed not by what the killer did, but by how closely he resembled the real thing. Law enforcement officials at the time were reportedly stunned by the resemblance. One even hinted that someone involved with the film might have had access to confidential case material. The director denied it, but the speculation never faded. The image became iconic. But in Texarkana, it didn't feel like a horror symbol. It felt like a secret someone wasn't supposed to remember so clearly. Fact #4, Scene 2, matched the real case too closely for comfort. The second on-screen assault feels like an escalation. Another couple, another isolated road, and this time something far more ritualistic. The killer doesn't just attack, he arranges. One victim tied, the other left broken. What most viewers took as stylized horror was actually a near-verbatim retelling of a real police report dated March 1946. The staging of the victims, the wounds, even the time of night, everything matches records from the second known Phantom attack. But there's a detail often overlooked. Internal police memos at the time used specific terminology to describe the scene language never released to the press. And yet, that same phrasing appears, almost word for word, in the film's narration. How did the filmmakers get that information? Officially, no one knows. But rumors swirled that someone inside law enforcement either leaked files or was quietly assisting the production behind the scenes. The families of the real victims never received notice. Some only realized their personal history was being dramatized when they saw it projected on a screen. When art imitates life, it can be beautiful. When horror reenacts trauma with this much accuracy, it starts to feel like theft. Fact #5. One location was still under investigation when they filmed there. During a quiet transitional scene, the camera pans across an abandoned shed, overgrown with weeds and half swallowed by time. It's only on screen for seconds, but that shed held more secrets than anyone expected. What the crew didn't realize was that the building they used as set dressing had recently been part of an actual crime scene involving a double homicide, eerily similar to the Moonlight murders. Police had sealed off the area months earlier, but the tape was gone by the time the production scouted locations. When law enforcement saw the footage later, they immediately recognized the site and confronted the filmmakers. No charges were filed. But that part of the movie was quietly scrubbed from marketing materials, and the building itself was demolished shortly after. Some say Pierce had no idea. Others believe he knew exactly where he was pointing the camera. Fact #6. The Texas Ranger in the film was a sanitized version of a real man. Captain J.D. Morales enters the film like a myth. Coat blowing in the wind, boots crunching gravel, eyes like stone. He's the law incarnate, summoned to chase down evil. But in real life, he had another name and a more complicated past. The character was loosely based on Manuel Lone Wolf Gonzalez, a renowned Texas Ranger with a reputation for flamboyant arrests and controversial methods. He was Hispanic, outspoken, and politically divisive, none of which made it into the film. Instead, Pierce created a cleaned-up archetype, a quiet, brooding white ranger whose moral compass was unquestioned. Why the rewrite? Some speculate it was to avoid triggering pushback from conservative audiences. Others say it was to erase the real Gonzalez's legacy, which didn't fit the narrative Pierce wanted to tell. Adding to the oddity, Gonzalez was still alive when the movie premiered and never gave permission to be portrayed. In interviews, he declined to comment, saying only, "I'm not that man, I never was." Sometimes, history is rewritten not to protect the guilty, but to make the hero easier to digest. Fact #7. The forest chase scene was filmed like an actual manhunt. The pursuit through the woods, officers yelling, lights slicing through darkness, a shadowed figure darting between trees feels chaotic, unpolished, real. That's because it wasn't choreographed. It was improvised panic caught on film. Director Charles B. Pierce chose to film the entire sequence without official location permits, deep in public forest land near Texarkana. The actors were told where to run, and that was it. No blocking, no lighting rigs, just instinct and adrenaline. And the result? Pure chaos. One actor reportedly fell into a ditch, tearing ligaments. Another crew member was nearly struck when a light stand collapsed in the dark. A handheld camera operator had to keep filming while crawling through underbrush, not knowing whether they were tracking the Phantom or about to trip over another cast member. There's a visceral realism to the scene that you can't fake, but that realism came with bruises, blood, and a near-emergency evacuation. The chase feels raw because it wasn't a scene. It was survival caught on tape. Fact #8. The trumpet killing came from an unverified urban legend. One of the most surreal and disturbing moments in the film involves a woman tied to a tree while the killer straps a knife to a trumpet, then plays her final note in a grotesque performance. Viewers assumed this was pure invention, but it wasn't. The sequence was inspired by an unconfirmed rumor from 1946 that a neighbor near one of the original crime scenes heard trumpet sounds echoing from the woods just before screams were reported. No trumpet was ever recovered. The theory that the killer was a failed band member seeking revenge was never verified. Yet Pierce latched on to the idea, weaving it into one of the film's most theatrical killings. It was poetic. It was horrifying. and it blurred the line between historical rumor and horror mythology. The scene lives on as one of the film's most unforgettable moments, but its origin remains as shaky and as haunting as the rumor itself. Fact #9. The town's fear returned both on-screen and off. In the movie, as the killings continue, Texarkana begins to unravel. Neighbors turn suspicious, lights stay on all night, and gun shops can't keep ammo in stock. But none of this was fiction. It was history painfully reenacted. During the actual 1946 killing spree, fear gripped the town like a storm. Parents pulled children out of school, couples stopped dating, police issued curfews, and hardware stores reported selling out of locks, bars, and motion sensors. The film didn't exaggerate this, it simply mirrored it. Pierce even recreated specific newspaper headlines from that era to use as set dressing. And when the movie screened in Texarkana 3 decades later, something unexpected happened. People locked their doors again. Locals said it wasn't just the movie, it was the feeling. The fear came back. The silence between scenes started to feel too familiar. The film wasn't just about what had happened. It was a reminder that it could happen again any night. Fact #0. The main suspect remained a ghost even to the script. As the story nears its breaking point, the investigation spirals. Officers follow dead-end leads, interrogate outcasts, and chase shadows. The killer remains an enigma, and the film leans into this mystery. But behind the scenes, that mystery had a name. By the time filming began in the mid-70s, some law enforcement officials believed they knew who the Phantom Killer was. A man with a questionable past, unusual movements, and loose ties to several victims. But the evidence was circumstantial and politically sensitive. No arrest, no trial. Pierce was aware of this suspect. According to an interview with a former crew member, a version of the script included a thinly veiled reference to the man. It was cut during editing. Why? Legal threats, the possibility of defamation, and the chilling reality that the suspect was still alive and still in the region. In the final film, the killer is never named. Not because no one had a guess, but because the wrong guess could have opened a door no one wanted to walk through. Fact #9. One of the most disturbing scenes happens in daylight for a reason. Unlike most horror films that confine terror to the shadows, The Town That Dreaded Sundown delivers a brutal sequence in full daylight. A woman is followed, attacked, and murdered in the open, no darkness to hide the act. This wasn't just a cinematic flourish, it was a deliberate act of defiance. Pierce reportedly chose a well-known street in Texarkana, arranged minimal blocking, and encouraged bystanders to watch as filming unfolded. It wasn't just about realism, it was a statement to local officials who'd tried to halt the project. He wanted to show that fear wasn't confined to the night, that horror could stroll down your sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon. To some, it was bold filmmaking. To others, it was a slap in the face, re-traumatizing a community under the Sunday. Fact #2. The train sequence almost didn't happen and nearly ended badly. In a tense moment near the film's climax, a train barrels past as the Phantom Killer vanishes behind the smoke and metal. It's visually stunning and deceptively dangerous. The production had permission to shoot near an active train line for only a short window. The team had one chance to capture the shot. Everything had to go perfectly. Timing, movement, and safety. It didn't. The first take was ruined by a bird flying across the lens. The second attempt came within seconds of the train's arrival. The actor playing the Phantom was nearly hit. A camera assistant had to dive off the dolly track. No one was hurt, but no one forgot. What appears to be a stylized moment of suspense was, in reality, a narrowly avoided disaster. And the footage that made it into the final cut was the last shot before they were told to leave. Fact #3. The final confrontation hid a real injury. In the movie's closing chase scene, officers corner the masked killer in an open field. Dust swirls, shots ring out. The Phantom stumbles but never falls. Tension runs high. So does adrenaline. And for at least one cast member, so did the pain. What the audience doesn't see is that during filming, a stuntman was seriously injured while running across the uneven terrain. A misstep on hidden irrigation tubing sent him crashing shoulder first into a fence post, dislocating his arm on impact. To make matters worse, a blank round was fired too close to a nearby boom operator, causing temporary hearing loss. In a production with minimal safety oversight, these incidents weren't unusual, they were expected. Instead of reshooting, Pierce made a creative decision: edit around the chaos. He added more cuts, shaky camera moves, and stirred up dust to blur the continuity. The result? A scene that feels frantic and unpredictable. Because it was. The film's finale doesn't just depict disorder. It's made from accidents wrapped in performance, stitched together by necessity. Fact Hashin 4. The ending was a curveball that no one asked for. As the movie winds down, it refuses to deliver closure. Instead of capturing the killer or solving the mystery, the final image is of a man waiting in line at a movie theater, face obscured, as the narrator says the killer was never found. That wasn't part of the original plan. Pierce added the final scene late in post-production after audience feedback suggested the original ending felt too neat. His new version implied the Phantom could be anywhere, even behind you in the crowd. Studio executives weren't told in advance. Local officials were furious. Some viewed it as a cruel provocation, suggesting that the man who'd terrorized their community might be alive and watching the movie with them. Pierce called it a psychological echo. For many in Texarkana, it felt more like a deliberate scar. Fact Hasson 5. Texarkana tried to reject the film and then embraced it. When the Town That Dreaded Sundown first screened, Texarkana wasn't amused. Local leaders condemned it, churches called it blasphemous, and family members of the real victims voiced outrage. The city attempted to ban public showings. Some drive-ins refused to carry the title. It was labeled an exploitation film that capitalized on unresolved grief. But time did something strange. Years later, the same town that tried to bury the film began hosting annual outdoor screenings, ironically, at a park near the actual crime scenes. What began as rejection morphed into ritual. Locals brought lawn chairs. Teenagers who'd never lived through the fear watched it projected against trees. The film became folklore. Was it healing? Denial? Or just a way to control the fear by giving it a time slot? Either way, the movie that once reopened wounds became part of the town's cultural scar tissue. Fact Hasson 6. Much of the script was written on the spot. If parts of the Town That Dreaded Sundown feel improvised, that's because they were. Charles B. Pierce, the film's director, often operated without a formal script. Instead, he jotted scene notes on envelopes, receipts, even bar napkins. According to crew members, entire sequences were built from memory and impulse. Dialogue was assigned minutes before shooting, and blocking was decided with chalk marks and verbal direction. This make-it-up-as-we-go method brought spontaneity, but also confusion. Continuity was a nightmare. Actors repeated lines differently in each take. One editor later said working on the film felt like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle from 3 different boxes. Pierce defended the chaos as artistic freedom. Real terror isn't staged, he said. It happens in the gaps. But some believe the real reason for the loose structure was financial. No time, no rewrites, just get the scene before sunset. Fact Hasson 7. One family nearly sued and demanded the film be burned. Behind the courtroom walls of a small Texas county, a legal threat nearly killed the movie. A relative of one of the real-life murder victims filed a cease and desist, arguing that the film had borrowed from police records so precisely that it violated the family's privacy. According to reports, they demanded that the reels be confiscated and destroyed. The case never made it to court, likely due to hush agreements or fatigue, but local theaters in at least 2 counties pulled the film from their schedules, quietly distancing themselves from the controversy. Pierce maintained that he'd fictionalized enough to protect identities, but in truth, some facts weren't altered at all. They were simply restaged, frame for frame, and that made the fiction feel too personal, too close, too deliberate. Fact Hasson 8. A censored scene disappeared and has never been found. There's a moment missing from the final cut of the film. One scene described in early reviews and shooting scripts depicted the Phantom Killer silently observing police patrols from the woods, taking mental notes, tracking their routines. But the scene was never shown publicly, and according to former crew, it was cut under pressure from local officials, who feared the implication that the killer had insider knowledge, that he may have been part of the system. Some believe the scene hinted at a theory police never wanted publicized, that the Phantom was someone trusted, a former soldier, maybe even law enforcement. The footage was stored, then it vanished. No one knows where it went. All that's left is the silence between scenes and the sense that someone behind the camera knew more than they should have. Fact Hasson 9. It shares a secret lineage with Boggy Creek. Long before the Phantom haunted Texarkana, Pierce had made another true story film, The Legend of Boggy Creek. It was his breakout, part documentary, part folklore, all low-budget genius. But Sundown didn't just borrow tone, it borrowed people. Multiple actors, crew members, and even locations were recycled from Boggy Creek. Lighting kits were the same. Costumes were modified from unused scenes. Some scripts overlapped word for word. Even the way scenes were framed echoed Pierce's earlier work. Long lens voyeurism, unbroken silence, a documentary rhythm masking staged violence. To some, Sundown was a leap forward. To others, it was Boggy Creek with blood. 2 films, 2 myths. One filmmaker obsessed with turning Southern whispers into cinematic fact. Fact #20. The idea came from a manuscript no one's allowed to read. Pierce claimed he built the film from news clippings, court records, and personal interviews. But whispers persist of an unpublished manuscript circulating among true crime collectors in the South during the early 70s. Its title, Phantom in the Pines, allegedly written by a journalist who covered the original 1,946 killings. The document reportedly named a suspect and detailed conversations never recorded in official files. Pierce is said to have read the manuscript before writing his treatment, yet the book was never published. No library catalog holds it. No public archive confirms its existence. Some say it was destroyed after legal threats. Others insist it was quietly bought and buried. But one thing remains. The film got too much right for comfort. And perhaps, not everything Pierce knew came from newspapers. Bonus fact, the killer may have seen himself on screen. At the end of the film, a faceless man lingers in a theater line, silent, unassuming, unnoticed. The narrator reminds us, the killer was never found. To most viewers, it's a narrative flourish. To others, it was a possibility that chilled them to the core. In 1976, when the Town That Dreaded Sundown premiered in Texarkana, rumors began to swirl almost immediately. A man, unknown to anyone in the audience, had been spotted sitting alone during the screening. No ticket stub, no conversation, just a fixed gaze and an exit before the credits rolled. He matched the approximate age the Phantom Killer would have been. He never returned. Police never confirmed the sighting. Theaters dismissed it as local myth. But then came a letter sent anonymously to a regional newspaper. No return address, no handwriting match. It read only this: "You got it close. Closer than I liked." The letter was dismissed as a prank, but for some in Texarkana, the timing was too perfect, the phrasing too specific. If the killer was still alive, and if he watched the film, he didn't flinch. He didn't protest. He simply acknowledged that someone had been watching him, too. The murders stopped decades ago, but for one night, the Phantom watched himself become legend. Which detail unsettled you the most? Was it the mask pulled straight from sealed reports? The real victim who never gave consent? Or the possibility that the killer watched the story unfold from a safe distance? Tell us what you believe. Was this film an act of memory or a violation in disguise? And if there's another story that's been buried too long, drop the title in the comments. We'll find what's left in the dark.